class on the USS Starr, aka 67, and we formed our ship's company in Newport, Rhode Island. And we had one whole barracks. It would be the first floor and second deck, and they were full when he was assembling all the guys together. We was given liberty there to go into Newport, and there's a lot of things that happened there. Is probably I don't want to dwell on them too much. I got to go out around, just walk around around. Called Chesapeake Bay or something. It's a peninsula of land just out from Newport, where all the rich homes are, Kennedys, all them. Narragansett Bay, and Kay Crandall and I buddied around together quite a lot. And he came from a big background of seamen, all officers, though. However, on the Jamestown Island, which is just off of Norfolk, I stayed at his, I think it was his grandmother's place one or two evenings after, while we were off on Liberty, and all the pictures on the walls in her house was of admirals, and I don't think there's anything less than an admiral in their family, except Kay. He was a seaman first class, just like me. We were there probably about 3-4 weeks, forming up our ship's company, which I don't think it included officers. I think right where we were, officers were probably someplace else. We were allowed to go out, go to movies and stuff like that. We were treated okay. And then we were sent via train from Norfolk, not from Norfolk, but from Newport down to Norfolk. I think it's Newport News or someplace like that where we first came in Charleston. And our ship was already there, being fitted out with armament and such. And the day we got there, we were put aboard the Star. People know what the Star is, so maybe I'll show it. Okay. Now where I worked was right there. In fact, you can see somebody right there standing there. And from this yard arm here is where all our messages were. And of course we had a yard arm up here. Here's the crow's nest right here. And then there's a little ladder which goes up. And then there's a cross arm here where our halyards are. At times it comes back down here where I have a hard time sending them just in the right direction, because I have to go backwards. Okay, now my place where I slept was right about down in here, down on the first deck, down lower. There's a place where we go down below decks right here, and also up in here, which has a bunch of ladders that go down. Okay. We stayed at, there was an AKA 68, I believe, was berthed next to us, and then we had shipyard workers that were running back and forth from between the two ships. We had a christening ceremony, and they busted a bottle of something over the bow, and it was, and I can't remember, it was a lady, and what relation she had to the ship, but it was a lady there that busted the bottle on the bow. Then we had, I don't have the pictures here of the christening ceremony, but we were already there a good share of the afternoon. Well, we've been there a couple of weeks. We finally set out on our shakedown cruise, which took about a day and a half, 2 days, and there were a lot of first-time sailors out there. They were fairly seasick on our, because we had a long swell that we were taking that day. Then when we go up to Narragansett, there was it was during the afternoon, and the P-38 was doing gunnery practice, and it would come screaming down and shooting at a sock that was being dragged by another plane. And one of these 50 caliber bullets hit our deck, and they're just about a foot or so from where I happened to be standing, but it ricocheted around. We never did find the bullet, the shell, but it probably went back into the drink. I'll cut off. When we was in the Norfolk Charleston area, we had Liberty once every other day or so, and that's my first time I ever came across anything was segregated. Kay Crandall and I were walking down the street one afternoon, and it was a very busy side of the street, and we noticed the other side wasn't very busy at all. So why not walk down a sidewalk where you didn't have to keep walking and getting out of the way of people? So we walked across the street, and we heard people screaming and hollering, and by that time we were already across, and we noticed some of the black people, as they're called now, they were sort of looking on, watching what's going to happen, and these men were rather violent in their talk and actions, and they told us to get back. Says, that's the nigger side. And it sort of offended us, but we got back because we didn't want to raise a rumpus. So it wouldn't have bothered us one way or the other. We left Norfolk on November 28, 1944, heading for Panama Canal en route to Pearl Harbor. We had good weather all the way down through the Caribbean. I remember at nighttime, we had life jackets assigned to us, and each life jacket had a little flashlight, and if you fall in the water, that goes on. So you'd have these little lights in the water. So I was on night watch, and I was on the side of the port side of the flying bridge, looking down, and all of a sudden I saw these bunch of little white lights, and I assumed that somebody fell in, so I was hollering, "Man overboard!" And nobody paying attention to us. If it had been somebody overboard, but they knew what, I guess they knew what it was. It was this phosphorescent jingy-dings that float in the water all the time. It looked exactly like the lights from our life jackets. Well, if we stopped to pick up every one of them, we wouldn't have had enough room on the ship to get to Panama with. It was really loaded. We came into Panama. It was early on a morning. I don't see which. Oh, December 3rd, 1944. Now I'm not positive what was the name of the port. There's a port on both sides of the canal, on Pacific and Atlantic side. But we arrived there and we spent probably a half a day waiting around to get into the canal. Well, we did get in the canal. The Kroll twins, who were signalmen with us, had an uncle who was one of the assistants that ran the locks. So he sent messages and that, but they never did get a hold of him. They wanted to let him know they were going through. We left the Panama Canal on the 4th, so that was one day from the time we came through from the Atlantic, and we were on our way. I remember going through the locks, and then we came into a large body of open water, like a big lake, and it was hot, beastly hot there. And as we go along, the draw of the ship, as we go up the channel, sucks the water away from the shore and disperses it behind you. Well, the water would come down these deep inclines, and here would be gators crawling all over, trying to get up to higher grounds. And at that time, I visualized going in for a swim, reluctantly, and I imagine I'd learn to swim a little bit better, faster. We arrived at Pearl Harbor December 18th, and when we immediately went into maneuvers. Went to the outlying islands, and that's where we had the boat crews go out and take the troops ashore and unload them, come back, and that was quite an exercise. They even had planes to make it quite authentic. They had planes diving around us. But one plane, I had my glass on him at the time. He looked like he was having trouble. It was a Hellcat, a Wildcat or Hellcat, but it was a Navy plane. And all of a sudden I saw something go one to the left, and I saw something drop away, and it was a pilot. He ejected, and the plane crashed not too far from a lot of the ships there. That went on for a few days. See, it was the 18th of December when we got there, and January 27th. So we had about, what would that be, almost 4 weeks. That sound right? About. Anyway, we left Honolulu for where we didn't know. We didn't know where we were going at that time. But we, just before we got to Eniwetok Islands, the captain came over the PA system and told us we were heading for a place which was the Volcano Islands. And he said it was a place called Iwo Jima, and that was all the information we had. But that same night same day that he told us, that night of the same day he told us where we were going, Tokyo Rose was on the radio, and she was telling us that she knew where we were going. She knew where the ships were, and she very, whatever she said where we were, that's where we were. So they had, those Japanese were pretty smart too. They knew it, but the only thing is we had submarines around us. They were picking them up, but the Japanese weren't doing anything. They were there. It made for a nervous time of your life to think of there's somebody out there could be easily pointing a torpedo at you. But then when we arrived at Eniwetok on February the 5th, that's one day before my birthday, and 1945. And then we left on February the 7th, and left Eniwetok, heading for Saipan. Eniwetok is made out of coral. I don't remember ever seeing any vegetation on there, but there was a place, an inlet, where the ships, some of the ships anyhow, could get in there. And I can remember some of the fellows break the monotony, jury rigging up some fishing tackle and catching these horrible looking fish that come up all spiny, and they weren't hunting, fishing for them to get something deep. They just wanted to fish. And we arrived at Saipan on the 11th of February, and we arrived at 11th, and we stayed there 5 days, and this is where we were forming the invasion forces, the entire flotilla. And we left Saipan on February the 16th, and on February the 19th, it was dark, and when we came in, so when the light started to come up, here's this island with a volcano on the south side of it. We were on the east side of Iwo Jima. That's where most all the ships were. We had to wait around while the planes, bombers, fighters, and everything else were pelting the island, and made it very, very smoky. And then at a prearranged time, we had our boats all in the small boats all in the water, all manned, the men in them, and at a prearranged time they had to go form up with the other ships. and then they went. They had a certain way they circled around so that they wouldn't run into each other, but still would stay. And then all of a sudden at 9:30 they gave the orders, and all the ships turned around, and then they were headed in for shore. And I can vividly remember, and I did some quick praying for the fellows I knew that were going in, and I knew that how they must have felt, because I felt pretty empty myself, and knowing that they're sending most of these fellows in for on the final part of their life here on Earth. It is a little hard sometimes to think about it. After watching for some time, I could see this where the men were, and I could see this machine gun firing coming down the sides of the Mount Suribachi, and always having in mind that one of those has got to be hitting some of our poor fellows. A lot of things interesting happened while I was during my short stay at EWO. I did see the actual raising of the flag on Iwo Jima. In fact, as I saw it twice. I saw it when they took it down and put up the bigger one. I could just make the men out. The flag, first one wasn't a very big one, so the second one was about twice the size, I guess. I can remember looking along the shoreline with the spyglass, and I saw a Marine walking along with a rifle over his right arm, and he stopped to light a cigarette. And as he was standing there, there was a little Japanese soldier come running out of the hole. This was off of the east side of the island. Ran up, scampered up over some thickets, running like mad, and the Marine saw him at the same time, but he didn't raise his rifle to shoot him. He just took off at a fast pace right along behind where the little fellow ran. So they ran over the ridge. I never saw him again. I don't know, there's so many things that happen there. I don't know if I'm going to be missing anything. Now, we had ammunition to disperse to the cruiser Salt Lake City, and the waves were quite, well, they weren't rough, but they were enough so that two ships coming together, one was going to be going up, one would be going down. It's pretty hard. They put the booms up and out they put all of the ammunition in these big rope nets, and they grabbed the four corners with it and lifted up, go over and swing it down to the deck. Well, they couldn't drop it to the deck because of the extreme motion of the ship. Salt Lake City was tied up to us by a big hawser lines, and one of the swells, she crashed into us and took out a 40 millimeter gun emplacement off our ship. Bended up pretty badly. And at that time, they decided to do it differently. And well, prior to that, with all the shooting that was going on, a lot of the ammunition we had already put on board her. She was taking it on the starboard side and loading it on the port side and toward shore. So we were just pretty loud, and the concussions are quite bad. But anyway, we finally unhooked from her and pulled out, and the small boats took the ammunition over and handed it up to them, which is, those sacks of powder are very heavy, but they really had a bad job on their hands. The name, we always hear of Mount Suribachi and that, but the name given to the operation, they call it the Hot Rock. On 5th of March, we left Iwo Jima. Well, first of all, we stayed there for some time, taking the wounded off from shore. Brought up, they would do what they could to help them, then we put them off over to the hospital ship. I think the hospital ship was called Hope or some name like that. It was a huge ship, and I don't know how many thousands of people they could handle, but they were prepared for it. So we left to go to load up for the next invasion, which was Okinawa. So our orders sent us to Leyte, the island of Leyte in the Philippines, and there was the port in Leyte is called Tacloban. Taclobin, or Tacloban, and that's where we picked up all the troops that we were going, and plus armament and vehicles and that to go to Okinawa with, I beg your pardon, to the Philippines, to go up to Okinawa. When the troops were coming aboard, up these cargo nets were hanging over the side of the ship, and as the men were coming up, I looked down in there and I saw an Indian down in the small boat, and I thought I recognized him, and it turned out it was my cousin Isaac. It was either Isaac or Jacob. Right now I can't really remember which one it is, but because they were brothers. But anyhow, he stayed with me up on the flying bridge for his whole trip from Leyte to Okinawa. He stayed aboard ship there. And
what was his last name?
Green Sky. Isaac or Green Sky. And he was just a cousin. But at least I met somebody else that I knew. On the last day that we were there unloading, as soon as we had, Ernie, we went in April 1st at Okinawa, and Isaac got off the second day that we were there, and we were in a place called Naha Bay, Naha, Naha Bay, and Naha, I think, was the capital of the island. Naha was the capital of Okinawa, and this is probably where we had more, the Navy had more of the receiving end than the fellows did on Iwo Jima, because the suicide planes were quite active down there. Skirmishes on shore weren't very plentiful. The Army and Marines didn't really get pelted until they got inland a little bit, and that's when the Japanese really dug in. I can remember they sent when we had reports that bogies is a name given for unknown aircraft, which it generally always meant Japanese. So the bogies were coming in, and they immediately ordered all of the LCVPs and LCMs, which had smoke pots on their stern, to light them and to go all around the waters around where the ships are, because they wanted to have a smoke screen. Well, it just happened. The atmosphere was low enough so that it kept all the smoke down to the water. So we were perfect black silhouettes in the water there, which makes you feel like a sitting duck. The destroyers on the picket lines are on the outer fringes, and they were taking a terrible beating from Japanese planes. There was at nighttime they never left us for long, and at nighttime we have to go out and move around to keep away from submarines and stuff like that, so they put us out where they'd be harder for it to hit us. And while we were, and it was about our second or third night there, that Japanese suicide boat put itself into the hold of the AKA just astern of us. Now, after we'd been down there for a couple days, I saw an LCI, that's called Landing Craft Infantry, and came right close to us going to shore, and it had a small sign on the side of it that said Ernie Pyle. So this was the one that he was the famous newspaper reporter, or news reporter anyway, of that time in the world. And he was on his way into shore at Okinawa to observe. He got killed the day after he went. The day after I saw him, he was killed. He was riding a jeep someplace in Okinawa, and they were hit. During our time anchored there in the bay at Naha Bay, and there was reports of bogies coming in pretty bad. And there was a plane that came over which I recognized very much. It was a TBF Grumman Avengers, our own plane. Well, most of the guys were quite fidgety, and because of all the attacks that was taking place, so they somebody triggered a 50 caliber at the pilot as he was on reconnaissance, I'm sure, just following the shoreline. He just had to go over some of the ships that were there, and somebody opened fire on him. And he never had a chance. As soon as one or two guys started shooting, they all shot at him, and they took him down. When he went into the bay, I saw what was happening to start with, and I started hollering into the speaker down to the quarterdeck of what they were shooting at our own plane, but it was too late. And a message came in, and it just happens that I'm the one that received the message, is that the Admiral got wind of this, and he really read the riot act to all ships, and he wanted to know who was the one liable for it. Well, there's nobody's going to say that I shot the first shot, but it just happened that it was one of the small boats, of our own small boats, that came back, and they were padding their 50 caliber machine gun and to let us know that they're the ones that were shooting at them. Well, as soon as that reprimand came around, they weren't padding their gun anymore. So they didn't want it. On April 9th, after being there 8 days, I'd been up for about 48 hours with no sleep, as well as some other guys, and I was told I was able to go sack out for a while, and I took advantage of it. Well, I put a hammock, I had tied a hammock up there across the passageway, which wasn't being used at that time, and up on the flying bridge, and I'd just gotten to sleep, and all of a sudden I was being bumped around with the guys using some profane language and letting me know that I shouldn't be there, and screaming and hollering their heads off. And finally one guy said, "We've been hit and we're sinking." Well, I couldn't believe him, because I was so sound asleep. I had slept right through the explosion, and the ship had sunk, and those guys hadn't to come over, crawl, and shake me up. I probably would have gone down with the ship. I came out on the deck, and there was a fellow signalman. His name is Charles Davies. I could pick him out in the dark. This was about 4:30 in the morning. He was so scared he was white, and I don't blame him. If I'd been in his position, I was asleep, so I didn't see it or hear it or feel it. But he says, "We've been hit and we're sinking." Well, that, of course, that was everybody's feeling, was that we were sinking. And of course, I just didn't believe them until the officers came on, and they doused all the lights. No lights on the ship, externally. We had work lights before that out there, but because of the fact they didn't want to give the Japanese a chance to have something to pinpoint with. Yeah, we had the reason they think that the reason that we were targeted by a Japanese suicide boat was that they thought we were loading ammunition off on the small boats and taking it ashore with, in all respects. The small boats were taking empty shell casings off our ship, and by these cargo nets, you lift them up and they put them in the deck, they go off and dump them someplace. Well, this was the reason that I think that we got hit, because there were other ships closer to shore, which would have been more easy to hit than to go way out where we were. When we shall I reminisce one thing? At Iwo Jima, some of our men got in a small boat and went around to the west side of the island. And like all good Americans, they were souvenir hunting. And they went ashore. You know, there were a lot of dead Japanese lying on the ground there, and they were ransacking the place. They'd pick up swords and knapsacks and everything else that they could, and they got. I got a knapsack from they were throwing away. It was a knapsack that was used by a United States Marine, but the Japanese picked it up someplace and sewed their own name in it. Now the name at one time was on there, and his name was Richardson, was the name of the Marine, either Army or Marine. And but anyhow, the fellows had a lot of souvenirs. When they came back, when this small boat came back with a load of souvenirs, the captain got wind of it, and he said the next man that touches his foot to the boat to head for shore for doing anything like that is for be court-martialed. And so that stopped the souvenir hunters. Well, one of the things that they got was a Japanese rifle, which was everybody was looking at it, and it was the evening of when they had it. It was down in the holes, and they kept holding it, turning it in different directions. Everybody looking at it, and they always kept coming back with the muzzle kept coming back towards my stomach, and I was very touchy. And I said, no way. Pointed at me. He said, "There's nothing wrong with it." And he turned it around sideways, and it was booby trapped, and it went off. And I put that bullet right through the wall or the bulkhead, and I mean went right through. It was.
Nobody checked the chamber or anything on it?
They were just so happy to have a souvenir. Could have gone through a whole dozen of those guys who'd been lined up. Well, that's the one thing I want to reminisce on. See, we've
Well, you just got to the Japanese suicide boat.
This fell down. Is this still? The time that suicide boat hit us was 4:20 in the morning. We left. We were still there for a couple of days. After that, and they sent us to Guam on April 14th, and April 14th we arrived at Guam and left the same day. We were just there just long enough, and then we April 18th we passed south of Eniwetok. That's where we when we first started the invasion. Passed south of Eniwetok and arrived at Pearl Harbor. We left Pearl Harbor. We arrived in Pearl Harbor on April 28th, and May 5th we arrived at San Pedro, California. While we were there, they removed all the ammunition from our ship and took us over, put us in dry dock to get repairs. I was given an 11-day leave along with the other fellows, and then on my leave, I was just Los Angeles Airport, where I got my tickets to fly to far Chicago, and there were a lot of newsmen as I remember, because of not because there was a lot of sailors and Army and Marines there, but because there were the celebrities there, and one of them was Frank Sinatra. Well, I imagine he was the main one. And it turned out that Frank was assigned to the same plane which I was, and it was the flagship of the TWA Airlines. It was a DC-3. Now, a friend of mine from aboard ship came up and told me while we were still there. He says that he's going out on the next flight, and after I got home, and it was in the paper that Frank Sinatra got bumped off of. He bumped a veteran from Iwo Jima off of the plane so he could go home, so he could go have a room aboard ship. Well, that wasn't the truth, because this young fellow was assigned to another flight, not the one we were on. Frank Sinatra was, he sat 2 seats ahead of the passenger's door, which would be on the left side, along with another fellow who was off of our ship. His name was Cox, and they became good buddies as far as traveling buddies. And our flight stopped in our air flight stopped in Phoenix, Arizona, and it was breakfast time, and so we all went into the breakfast bar that was there, and they had just separate tables, but Frank says, let's put them all together. So he put 3 or 4 tables all together, and we all sat around there and ordered our breakfast, and he paid for everybody's breakfast. So they had a lot of the help was trying to get in there to get his signature, autograph. We arrived in Chicago, and I'm not sure if that's, I don't think it was O'Hare then, it was a different name. Anyway, there was Cox's wife was standing next to the entrance where we come along when we got off the plane, and she threw her arms out. We were running like mad, and so did Cox, hold his arm out, and she ran right by him and grabbed Frank Sinatra. So it was amusing. I caught a train from Grand Central Station, I think it was called, caught a train as far as Grand Rapids, and from Grand Rapids, the mail truck was coming north, and the fellow from East Jordan was driving that truck, and he gave me a lift up to Petoskey. So that's when I got home. And I got home on the 19th, and we were married the same day. I got home about 6 o'clock in the morning. I don't know. Well, we got married on May the 19th while I was on leave, and I spent the whole time here in Petoskey because our families were both there, and we felt as if we should stay around. While we were gone, while I was on leave, Commander Goldsmith was taken off as captain of the Starr, and then Captain Moody took over. So when I came back, I had a new captain. I went through about the Sinatra thing, and Cox, and Harshberger. I'm going to have to jump back and forth because I don't want to mess it all up. Yeah, that flight from Los Angeles to Chicago took 14 hours. I don't know, how fast do they make it now? About 3 hours, maybe? So when I got back to the ship, we loaded gasoline when we were down in Redwood City, California, San Pedro, Redwood City, and we carried gasoline by these big 55-gallon drums. So we had quite an explosive situation there. So that's what we was carrying back overseas on that trip. Okay, on June 24th, 1945, we left the United States for Guam. And we stopped at Eniwetok, and on July 7th, and the next day we left Eniwetok on our way to Guam. We arrived July 11th, we arrived at Guam. 9 days later, we left Guam. During that time, they let us have liberty going ashore. And that's when I went out and did some swimming off of a place called Gab Gab Beach. That's G-A-B, Gab Gab Beach. I don't know how I got that name. And it was a nice beach, but it was all just like Iwo Jima. It was black lava, granulated lava. And you go to walk into the water from shore, and within about 2 or 3 steps you're over your head, and this granulated lava would just mush right along ahead of you. You couldn't walk in it, so you had to, in my case, dog paddle back and struggle like mad to get up on shore, because every time everything you touch, it would go back into the water and just disappear. It was quite deep. There was a at Gab Beach. There was a motor pool, they call it there, where they kept all the small boats that were removed from other ships. There must have been a few hundred of them there, all tied to each other. And then there was one fellow that no doubt had freaked out someplace along the line and lost his balance up above, and it said he was the commander of all the boats, and he was jumping from one boat to another, and it would make us a little leery at first until we realized that he was harmless, but he didn't look too harmless to start with. He looked sort of fierce. We left Guam on the 20th of July and went back Pearl Harbor, and then on August 2nd, 7th, we left Pearl Harbor, and we had another load we was taking back overseas. Now, it was on August 14th, 1945, we received word of Japan's surrender. That was after the atomic bomb. So we went on to Guam. On the 19th, we arrived there, 19th of 1945. And then on September 2nd, we left Guam. We passed the Ulithi Islands, arrived back in Leyte on the 6th, and 2 days later, on the 8th, we left Leyte and arrived at Iloilo, in the port of Panay Island in the Philippines. Let's see, the ships in that convoy we went down with was APA 3 and APA 54 and APA 91, APA 121, APA 70, and PC 555. Now that's patrol craft. AKA 67. That's us. Then we arrived at when we left Iloilo, we went up to Jensen, Korea, which is now called Incheon. Then we had Liberty on the 26th of September in Jensen, and on the 27th of September we left Jensen, heading back, but because of a typhoon which we ran into, we turned around and ran back up into the Yellow Sea. I was up in Korea, and I went ashore. We were the first Americans in there since before World War II, and so we went around bartering. The seamen went around bartering cigarettes and stuff to get souvenirs, as usual. Like all Americans are still hunting for souvenirs, and I I just missed getting a nice kimono for my wife because I was trying to barter the guy down too much, and he finally got to a place where he wouldn't do it anymore. And the next day I went back. I was bound determined I was going to get it, but he had already sold it. I took a picture up in Jensen on the hill. It's called MacArthur Park now. Back then, I don't think it was named anything. And I had taken a picture of the harbor from there, and since then, my son Tom went to Korea to work and live, and he took a picture from the same spot where I was, and you could see quite a difference in the big oil tanks that were sitting out in the bay, and the buildings that were up there. They didn't have those kind of buildings when I was there. On that typhoon we was running into, it took as I remember, about 4.5 hours to turn the ship around, because every time we go to turn, we caught a trough, and your ship would list over heavily. And so they had to keep working at it. They finally did make it, but I felt as if we were completely on our side when they did finally make it all the way around. Then we were able to outrun the typhoon up when we went up into the Yellow Sea. I've never seen a storm like that before in my life, and I don't want to ever see another one. That was on, see, September 30th. Yeah, September 30th when we went back. Then we went back, we left the convoy and we went back to the Philippines, arriving at Leyte on the 4th of October. Then we left Leyte for a place called Guinean. And we left Guinean on the 7th, and in the middle of the night, we passed Corregidor, and then we arrived in San Fernando. That's in what they call the Ligayen Gulf. Let's see, I have a picture of, I don't know how close you can get to this. You can see what now we're, whoops. Okay, we can see the